Good morning, everybody. This is Mark Fowler, and this is the Always Creating Value podcast that we started sometime back in September. I forget this. We meet every second Wednesday of the month, so whatever that was it was an exciting experience. And now we're on our 9th interview, and it's even more exciting. We actually know what we're doing. We're having a good time too. So I'm to remind people, I'm a business reengineering specialist, CPA. I work with companies in transition, whether it's bankruptcy, crisis management, growth, merger and acquisition, senior management issues with companies. Along the way, one of the things that has been an inherent value proposition for us in being able to help these companies go from where they are to where they need to be is tapping into their ability to create value on a consistent basis, not one-time shots, not when we need it, not when we're just in trouble, but on a consistent basis. And in the work that we've done, sometimes we find companies who are doing a great job at that. And what we have to do is enhance that and take it to the next level, but we don't struggle with, having to define what always creating value has been. And then there's other situations where people don't even know they're being creative, and we need to tap into that and help them become much more comfortable with the fact that, just because they don't know something, that doesn't mean they don't have something to offer, and they can't offer that on a consistent basis. And one of the reasons we're here today to talk to Lynn Kitchen is that she, like all the other people that we're going to have in the future and the people that we've had before, understand the value of being able to consistently look at things and say, what can we do better? What do I have to learn? What kind of things can we turn from bad to good? And be thinking about doing the right thing. And in many cases, stepping up to be more ethical, more truthful, more on the same page with the people we work with and more on the same page with the people that we serve. I'm the president and founder of Stowe Management Corporation, the business reengineering part of my practices. And then I'm the co-founder and author and CEO of Revolutionary Conversations, which behind me is our book, multi-award winning book about conversation and how it can be much more effective and much more engaging for all of us. Today, and I hope you enjoy our event today, Lynn Kitchen. I've known Lynn for a number of years, through the United Nations Association, for her friendship with my co-author, Barbara. And she's always amazed me with the things that she does. Every time we talk, every time we meet, she's got a new card on the table. And it's a robust card. It's something that all of us are interested in. She's helped me a bit with, and her partner, Jared, have helped me a bit with our previous book, as well as a forthcoming book. They're always exciting to talk to. And one of the things that amazes me is how Lynn has been able to just keep going and raising the octave that she has, of the things that she has to offer. And I'm going to let her talk about those right now. Lynn Kitchen.
Hi, Mark. Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Why? I love your topic. I just love always add value, always create value. It kind of reminds me of that old saying, always be selling. But in this case, it's always add value, always be creating value. I'm just so excited about that topic, first of all, because I'm a proponent of that. I study it. I want to be the kind of person that brings more value every day, almost like it's a way of life, Mark. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome. You've always created value for me and my team. I remember, and I put it in the introduction to your podcast, was that you showed up at the Revolutionary Conversations Power of Peace interview and you were the only person to do this, having read the book and having ideas and having actually not only showed us your homework, but showed us the 3 or 4 things you'd accomplished with it. So
Yeah.
you created value from the moment you showed up on that.
Well, it was a pleasure to do so, Mark. And thank you for saying that, because I really love that book as well. It is one of my go-to books ever since I, bought it and have it in my hands and have it on my desk. And it is something that I actually use, and this is no joke. I use it right before I know I'm going into a potentially difficult conversation or one that I'm nervous about. And I use it with family members. And I have, if you want, I have something to add right here, right now, on how I'm using it newly to add value to my life now. And I'm excited about this. Is a brand new way of using it. It may not be brand new to you, Mark, because since we've spoken last, you've probably had millions of people using that book in millions of different ways. And I know you've been teaching it.
I hope so.
Yes, I know you've been teaching it, at UCLA and places. But may I share what that is?
Sure, please do.
All right. I love the book. The title itself is so inspiring, Revolutionary Conversation. I started to ask myself, is there a possible way that I could have a revolutionary conversation with myself? And just the question I've never asked myself before, what is a revolutionary conversation with me? And you often talk about how when you are coming alongside a client, to be on the same side of the desk as the client, so that you're looking at circumstances in the same way as them. And then you stop together and you use the tools together and you ask, how can I help you? And also, what risks can we take to further an understanding of the circumstances that you're presented with? And I'm actually using the tools now to do that with myself. And 2 people on this side of the desk are my current little self and my future big self. Those are
so your current
people.
Self and your future self?
My future self.
Yeah.
And I started doing that with things that are bothering me, and asking my future self, who's already solved the problem, and also who represents perhaps a higher power, who's in league with my future self. And together we're looking at circumstances, and I've been having some breakthroughs, and I'm excited all over again with the Revolutionary Conversations book, and how I am using the tools for my own self growth. But more than that, it is adding value. It's adding value to an acceleration of of moving through blockages, moving through resistances that perhaps are of my own making anyway. I love it.
Well, first of all, I number one, I want to thank you in several ways. You're right. That is something I've been using for a long time. But we never brought it out. We never brought it out because it bumped into people's. A lot of people don't know how to do that. And when I was reading our pre-interview meeting, I was actually thinking about the fact that you were doing some of that already. I didn't. It was just vague thoughts. You were talking about how you made your decision to be in the investment firm, and you were thinking about, you stopped yourself to say, well, wait a minute, how do I make this decision? What kind of help do I need to understand that? And you discovered that by, what do I want to talk about? You were doing this. No wonder you tapped into this so well. You were already doing some of it.
Well, yeah, and I think that's why this topic is so easy to tap into also, because we are all interested in growth. Even it's the way of the world. It's the way of nature. Its value is created by expansion and by increase and by moving into the best people that we can be. And the book that you have is one of the tools that really makes a lot of sense. It's easy to use, and I just love it.
Well, thank you. Well, we have kept that, the internal. I mean, we do talk about it, but, stopping and thinking and whatever, but we don't talk about doing the conversation, possibly because it has a prayer-like aspect to it. We knew we were bringing out something new. And I didn't want it to be something so new that I didn't want to give people the opportunity to say, no, that's getting into other territory and stuff like that.
I'm just saying the
But you made me
application
do
is
it.
there.
Huh?
The application is there.
Yeah.
And it's I'm very aware of how growth really is hand in hand with spiritual expansion, because every one of us is a part. We're doing this together, whether you're a part of an organization, a corporation. We are individuals who are co-creating coordinated movement in a same direction, hopefully, and adding value to everything that we choose to do in life. And a lot of that is meaningful. And you cannot divorce the whole of us, the spirituality, the wealth building, the relationship building, health, wealth. Every part of it is value adding. It's adding value to who we're becoming and who we can become,
including yourself. And if we look at our world today, we're not stopping to consider and have those little conversations within ourselves to say, first of all, am I doing the right thing? Why am I here? I think one of the things that people don't do today, and that is to pay attention to what they don't know. They don't take the time. They don't say, let me understand what I don't understand. And if you're not doing that, in your head, just to keep yourself straight, you go down a rabbit hole. You tend to go off track with what you're doing. And it sounds like, again, reading the pre-interview, this quality in you was always there. And Revolutionary Conversation, you were able to tap into it so quickly because you were already doing a great deal of that. Self-reflection, you talked about the reflection, being able to reflect on something and pay attention to the kinds of things that were important to you. Like you talked about with your wealth management clients, you needed to be conservative, but with a reasonable amount of risk. But you also talked about the different kinds of client you might have and the different things that you had to reflect on about them, and you had to be intuitive about them.
True.
This touching yourself a bit in order to relate to somebody else has been there, I think. And maybe I'm just, talking off the cuff, but I just kept reading and I kept saying, you are constantly reflecting on what you're doing.
Yeah, I am. And actually now more than ever, Mark, and that's why I so appreciate you and that you're building a podcast around this topic. It's so refreshing. And that you're collecting points of views from all of the professionals. And I am so honored to be here today, just because of the value that you're bringing to us by just talking about how can we be in that reflective space so that the value that we do bring is conscious. So it is reflective, it's conscious, and it's meaningful, and then it lands on doing the right thing and doing better and doing more of the right thing and more better. And so that's called, creating future value is. And you mentioned my being in the investment advisory world. For those of you who don't know, Mark's referring to the fact that my first career was in about 35 years in the investment advisory world. And I was just reflecting back today on that experience working with clients who, you're holding hands on wealth creation. It is what you are doing with them to help them not only understand what it takes to create wealth, but also an investment advisor really takes the reins and creates those portfolios for you, with the idea that that is a two-way street and a communication. But I was reflecting today on all of the use of the word value in that profession. You have economic value added. We used to actually teach what is EVA, economic value added. And because I was a teacher as well as an investment advisor and spent, I think, 15 years as teaching portfolio management in the Pacific School of Finance. And economic value added was one of the concepts that we taught. Not an easy concept, to understand or to teach, but a very, very important concept. And then we would teach, well, what is value? And what is present value? And what is future value? And how do you make decisions based upon valuation? And it is really kind of interesting how we today make decisions all day long. How many decisions do you make all day long based upon our perception of value? And I want to have a little conversation today about how value is changing, how our intrinsic understanding of value in this world is changing. I mean, not just the dollar in terms of its value and what it can buy now. And of course, everyone knows we're in an inflationary mode, which shrinks the value of the dollar and the purchasing value. But, it pulls into question what value do we need to create? How much more value do we need to create to accomplish the goals that we want? But in addition to that, I think it brings into question, what is the future value that we want to create as a family, as an individual, as a family, as a city, as a state, as a country, for God's sake, as a world? What are our values? And I know, Mark, you do a lot of teaching around this concept, and I had a moment to reflect how we bandy about the word value without really understanding value.
Well, let me stop for a second.
Sure.
One of the things that impressed me in our pre-interview was your consciousness about the different stages of your client's world. Are you married? Are you newly married? Do you want children? Do you have adult parents that are somewhere along the line? You're going to have to address their needs as well. And as people get older and they start thinking about retirement, the kinds of different things that need to kick in. And in each stage, you are not only reflecting on, but putting on the table for other people's discussion. As your customer, your client, you're talking about how they participate in that value. And the reason reflecting back on this, to use we've repeated that term quite a bit, but to reflect back on that as it relates to the things you're talking about, the future, is that I think in the future, where we are today is we don't think about what's on the other side of the table as much as we used to. And, I think you're a good example, and you bring an awful lot of wealth to that ability for us to be able to not just come to the table with my agenda, and this is the way I want to do what I want to do.
Goodbye.
Oh, hopefully I got rid of something accidentally. Um, and so I want to go back to that. So could you do that a little bit, and then we can go forward
Sure.
a little bit.
Yeah. It's I actually retired from my first career. It's been 10 years ago now, but I loved noticing and studying what the values are of different. It's a life cycle of wealth. It's the life cycle of needs. It's a life cycle of in wealth creation over a lifetime. Just as you mentioned, people who are clients who are in the early stage of getting a job and creating a family, their needs are different and their values are different. And therefore, creating wealth has a different understanding and teaching there in that particular case, and different from a 45-year-old couple or a 50-year-old couple who are now making shifts and changes. Completely different from people who then, their children are grown, empty nesters, after they had put them through college, and perhaps utilized a lot of the assets that they had built up till now. Well, how do they replace all those assets? And now how do they prepare for a retirement? And the values that are important to them at that stage, completely different once again. And how do you connect with someone whose values are changing all the time? Now, that takes a lot of compassionate understanding, and compassionate capitalism, I believe, there's room for compassionate capitalism based on our understanding of what's important to and for others, and moving then people through to a later life experience in which their needs change once again. They're no longer having an income, but they're now requiring to draw upon their assets to live, in retirement. Completely different. And what is the arc of one's life, and how then do you create wealth to leave to another generation beyond you, and maybe their generation of generations and your grandchildren and so forth. So it's a whole dynamic, wonderful way of creating synergy within someone's understanding of, wealth isn't just money. It's not just your portfolio. It is how you create the relationships along the way, and what monetary strengths can you bring to the table. And I always took the understanding that it was my job to be extremely sensitive, but more than that, there's a whole amount of emotions underneath those values that come to play in wealth management. The ups and downs of the market.
So how do you ascertain, people, I was in public accounting for 10 years, so I had clients for, 10 years. A lot of the work I do today is not, I'm not working for clients for a long time. We come in, fix things, and, change them and move forward. But when you work with people for a long period of time, even as they're changing, sometimes you don't even see it. Sometimes, in my case, it was year to year, and with you, it might be, it might have been quarterly, it might have been whatever. So how do you go about tapping into those changes? Now, obviously, as we get older, so we can see some of that. How do you tap into their value propositions changing? How they see value? How do you tap into that perceptual dynamic?
Well, I thank you for it. It's a great question, and I can only look back and with the benefit of hindsight and say I think I did a pretty good job. I did the best job I could, and that I had my own values system of having regular conversations with the clients, so that I was the one reaching out. I didn't wait for them to call me when they were upset, when they opened the the monthly statement and saw that there was a decline in the market, therefore there was a decline in the market value. I anticipated the possibility of what emotional impact was going to happen when they did open that monthly statement. Of course, back then we had everything come in the mail. We didn't have the instantaneous things of the computers that investment managers have today. But I did really feel that conversations, just like in your book, was a very, very large part of reaching out to connect with what is going on and what changes can you share with me that you're going through. And the other part is education. Most people, I find, are afraid to admit that they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
And the field of wealth creation and money management and even in accounting, there's so much misinformation and so much fear. And should I do this and should I do that? And looking at other people who have, made an overnight fortune or something just because they happened to make a decision to buy something right before it went up. Other people may have sold it 5 minutes before and they've lost everything. So there's this constant roiling and broiling of emotions that happen alongside. And education is really important. So that's why I feel like I was a good teacher as well as a good educator. That doesn't mean that I ran a company that was extremely large either. We really were a smaller boutique company, and we liked it that way because it gave us an opportunity to really serve and be of service in the way that we wanted to. And that I feel proud of.
I would, if I had been a client, I know that I would have been very happy because you obviously, number one, are proactive. You talked about, getting there before the mail gets there.
That's right.
And you're right. A lot of things have changed, and a lot of people, because of the internet, we saw it in our consulting practice, our reengineering practice. People know more about, they think they know more about raising money for their business than we do, who've done it for decades, because they saw it on the internet. There's been so much of that, and that's beginning to, in from my case, it's beginning to diminish a bit because people are beginning to realize that they can't keep up, and
yeah, it's
overwhelming.
It's truly overwhelming. Many.
You have people now that do their own brokerage. They become their own brokers. They spend their day, they quit their job, and all they do is,
That's right.
buy and
The
sell
do-it-yourself trend it's enormous. It's self-empowering, of course. And the more you know, the more there is that you are aware that you don't know. Huge gaps of knowledge are dangerous, and we only had, as professionals, to look at 2007, 2008,
right,
at the amount of risk that was inherent in the economy that none of us really understood or really admitted, and certainly were caught on too late making changes in clients' portfolios because it was a boom dump. And those kinds of experiences are shocking. Of course, I have gone through that before as in the crash of 1987, when we did not anticipate a sharp increase in the monetary interest rates. That was Volcker. It was a shock. It was out of the blue, and the markets were shocked. And so when you have an economic shock that people don't see coming, how do you move through those? How do you navigate as an investment advisor, as a professional in your case, Mark? And those kinds of things are interesting because it's kind of like I look upon it as a divorce. Divorce, or things that can happen to us on a personal level. It's a shock. Shocks happen, whether it's an economic shock, a personal shock, a spiritual shock. things happen in our lives that we, cards are dealt that, may not have been any of our doing or any of our fault. But the arrogance with which most people think that they can, trade the markets, it's kind of interesting to me now more than ever. It's always been part of the lexicon of, winning. One person wins, great, and that creates eyeballs and sells newspapers. How and what I always took the practice of not listening to a lot of the hype and going in the other direction, very much of a contrarian myself, so that I could stay calm,
Centered.
and look for the real facts. And even then, it was very difficult to discern with the level of knowledge. Even after 30 years, you just think, okay, well, even that amount of knowledge in certain circumstances doesn't even serve me, because the tidal wave the tsunami just took everything out with it. And what can you do? What can you do? So these are
you can impact and what you can't.
What you can impact and what you can't. And then a lot of the time for me is helping people recover.
I would like to, before we talk about your books, work, and the mentoring work that you're doing, I would like to go back to what you were talking about, your future self, and you were talking about the need to being focused on being more value creation in the future, in the present. And I asked you to go back and look at what you've done. So, for 5 minutes, let's talk a little bit about what we just talked about and how it reflects to what you believe needs to happen in the future.
What a great question. What I think needs to happen in the future for each one of us is to understand that we have a present self and a future self. That is just like every corporation has a present value and a future value. And what I used to do in evaluating companies to make a decision whether it was a buy or a sell in any particular moment, that's a decision. It was to evaluate the difference between the present value of that corporation in that time and its inherent future value. And if that inherent future value looked like pretty promising, it was a buy. All right. I think we can do the same analogy as individuals now. So the present value of my circumstances, my life, and all that I've ever done, ever been, all of the accumulation of knowledge and experience, which has great value, right? You would agree? Experience
we don't
has
tap
great value.
We don't tap into it enough, that's for sure.
Right. And so right here, right now, in the present value of who we are and what we bring to the table, let's learn to value it, all of that, more in an appreciation sense. Let's bring some gratitude to ourselves on how well we've done, rather than looking only to what's missing. That's the difference that I would like to see in myself first. And maybe someone out there needs to hear that today. But in myself, I'm endeavoring on a daily basis to bring more appreciation to my experience. I was mad last year that I just turned 70. Mad. It took me a long time to really just get over being angry and self-deprecating that I hadn't accomplished a certain amount of things that was on my accomplishment list up till that point, until a few months ago, as I've been caring for my 99-year-old mother, witnessing how much in grace that she is right where she is. And that is potentially a window to look at my future self, you see. So I'm looking down the road now too and say, well, what can I do and who can I be? What is the value of my future self 10 years from now, 20 years from now? At 70, we look forward, and medically, we probably have 30 more years. Most of us who are healthy now at 70, or if you're 60, you're going to live another 30, 40 years. How can we create value now in what does it mean to us? What will bring value to us in the future? What will make us feel expansive? What will make us feel more loving, more generous, more giving? It's not always in the having. I think it's in the being. Who can we be? How can we be more peaceful? How can we be more grateful? How can we be more appreciative? How can we bring value to others without expecting so much in return? I have a friend who goes into every meeting, and I'm inspired by him. He goes into every meeting and he said, I'm going to teach you a new mindset of value. So I've got this from him. So this is not mine, but I want to share it right now. He calls it the 100-20 rule. You've heard of the 80-20
And this is, I'm
rule.
sorry, this is, who is this?
A friend of mine.
Oh, okay.
I'll give him credit. His name is David Meltzer. He's one of the keynote speakers in the television show that I produced. He's one of the keynote speakers in that television show. And he's a motivational expert and a mindset specialist. So he has this rule called the 100-20 rule. It's not the 80-20 rule. You've heard of that.
Yes, of course.
But his is the 100-20 rule. And it says, he says, know your value. Be your value. Bring your value to the table, whether it's a negotiation table, whether it is the relationship table, whether it is the table of creation, where you're creating value and co-creating with others to create a corporation, organization, and so forth. He said, for every time, and I'm going to, these are his props, $100 and $20. He says, he said, I bring $100 worth of value, but I only charge $20 for it. But I'm always bringing $100 of myself of value, even though it's only 20 that I'm expecting in return. And what does that do for me? He says, that is a mindset of value in which I am always ready to provide more value than what is expected, or more value than anything that I expect in return. And that by bringing more value to any situation, he says, I then have the opportunity to change the destiny of any organization that I'm involved with. And bringing value is a way of life. And bringing value in a mindset that shifts who and what I'm being. Why am I being in this world, if not to bring more value of that which is within me anyway, inherent? And it brings out this idea and he doesn't really go into this teaching more deeply, but I have sat in awe of the idea long enough to come up with this idea of my own. And that is that the value is that you're tapping into an unlimited source within. So we speak about resources and wanting to add value by finding resources, more resources, when in fact, the greatest resource that we have is the source within, which is unlimited.
in the world today, and I'm going to shift a bit, but in the world today, we find ourselves surprised that when there's a challenge, a substantial challenge, that we all pull together and we all get creative.
Yes.
But for whatever reason, we seem to believe that we need that challenge in order to do that. In reality, we should be doing that every day. It doesn't mean we have to do it in that level of dramatic, what happens when things fall apart and, your house burns and whatever. But, on a regular basis, we should be thinking about it. It does not have to be as dynamic, but as long as it's consistent, I think is,
Exactly.
yeah. Let's talk a little bit about what happens after wealth management. Let's tap into the books. Let's tap into you mentioned your TV show, and let's go to mentoring, because obviously your enthusiasm is a key to your own creativity, along with your ability to reflect and understand and pace yourself. You were talking about making sure the distractions, making sure that you're staying centered, are all things that make you powerful when you sit down across the table from others. So how did you get into books, and how did you get into mentorship?
A little bit by accident, but not totally by accident. I retired from investment advisory in 2010. That was after a medical diagnosis that took me a while to recover from. So I decided to retire one industry and then look around and say, well, what more is there for the old gal here? And I just got into tennis. I did just fun things like one would do to retire, but I got bored. And then I thought, well, what is next? I jumped into personal development. I was curious. I had worked with Reverend Michael Beckwith of Agape Church as a spiritual practitioner, and I loved his motivational style. And he had the ability to help through words shift one's perception without being religious. And I began to look into that idea for myself, and I found a lot of mentors who spoke to my heart, and I began to study with those mentors. And when I did that, I decided that there's that part within me that loves mentorship and the power of mentorship, where we can help others, give back, take knowledge that we've experienced and from our past, and pass it on, pass it forward, and do good deeds in the world. So a lot of this is all kind of coming together when I met Jared Rosen, whom you mentioned, who had an opportunity to create a new company called Dream Sculpt Books and Media, and asked me to be part of that endeavor so that we could help others who wanted to publish their good deeds and their good works. And every one of those books had something in it that would help others. And that got me interested. What can we do as a medium that can help others? Well, books is one medium. TV or media is another medium. And so I just began to get curious and fascinated with the different ways that we can help other people through the power of mentorship. And books is a great way of doing that. Videos are a great way of doing that.
Let's talk a little bit about where they could see you for the mentorship, because I think it's you're on television, you're on Spectrum or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I think you're referring to, in addition to that book business, I then decided I wanted to create something special on my own. And so I gathered all of the mentors that I have been working with, as many of them were my own mentors. And then I asked them who they would look up to. And so I decided, well, let's produce a whole show. Let's get all these mentors together and produce a television show, because I didn't think it had been done, but let's do it in a way where people could really experience motivational speakers from the stage and feel that rising conviction, when you get motivated, what you can do with your own rising conviction and how you feel the next day. You just go out and hard charge it. And I love that feeling. I wanted more of that feeling, and I wanted to be able to produce that feeling for others. So I became a producer, which is something I never thought I would do. Never had any clue on how to do that. Had no background in the entertainment world or anything like that. But I did find some inspiration from Walt Disney. It's kind of a cool story. Walt Disney. Some inspiration from Walt Disney.
Oh, Walt Disney. Okay, I got you.
And I'll tell you that story in a minute if you'd like to hear it. But what I did is not just with me, but along with my partner, Julie Jones Hamilton, and our other production partner, David Meltzer, whom I mentioned had the 120 rule. He was also the executive producer of the TV show called World's Greatest Motivators. And that TV show has 14 episodes, half-hour episodes, and it was aired on national cable television right at the beginning of the pandemic, 2020. And it aired all that year on 8 different cable stations. And now we are distributing it on live streaming services, including Hulu and Crackle TV and Plex TV, and many distributors of the show. And just recently, we have an offer for a German company who wants to take it internationally to Germany in the German language. So that means that we're just beginning to syndicate it overseas, where I believe the hunger really is in other worlds for the power of mentorship and the can-do attitude, and all of the messages that are in that show is that, you can do it if you believe you can. And what is this can stuff that I'm talking about? Really, it is adding value.
Right. Are you one of the mentors? Because, you're mentoring the daylights out of us here today.
Oh, thank you. I am not, because it was the best of the best. We did a show that was the best of the best, and that included people who've been, speaking on stages for 40, 50 years. We had Bob Proctor. He just passed away, unfortunately, but we were so proud that we have him on our marquee to bring his message worldwide. Jack Canfield, Les Brown, Brian Tracy, John Azaraf, Sharon Lechter, Mary Morrissey, these are names that have been at the top of the personal development field for years. And they've all been trained from, people before them, like Earl Nightingale and so forth. And so there's a whole history of mentorship upon whose shoulders I'm standing by being the producer. So it's not me, but I was very fortunate to have the vision, first of all, and then make it happen with the help of a lot of contributors.
Well, I could continue to interview you, but I know that James and Ann will have questions for you. But before we go to that, I want to thank you for bringing up revolutionary conversations, first of all, but also revolutionary conversations in our head. And you've now forced me, now that it's out of the box, so to speak, we have to deal with it. And I think I'll be looking to you.
Good, I challenge you. That's wonderful.
You've probably refined it in the ways that I never thought of. So anyway, I'll be back to you with that.
Oh, any way I can help, that would be wonderful. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it would be wonderful.
It was interesting to hear you mention some names that I haven't heard for a very long time. And that was when you mentioned Beckwith. My introduction to him was back, remember in 2006 when The Secret
yes,
was first introduced to us. And it brought about that whole idea of your own value and bringing what you value to yourself. And it seems to have gotten lost. And it went into a pocket that became very commercial. But I think that it's unfortunate that so many younger people coming up today don't have the kind of enthusiasm that people had around The Secret back all those years ago. Is there something that I'm missing that's happening today that I don't see that was as, besides what you're doing, bringing those kinds of people to the fore?
Well, Anne, thank you. That's wonderful acknowledging, and The Secret definitely opened, it was historic, and it opened our awareness. It's not the first time that has happened. I mean, most of us who are on this panel lived through the Vietnam War when, we were just moving through the 1960s of awakening all kinds of new ideas, love, peace, rock and roll. And then, we kind of went dormant for a while. The Secret was the first pop-up because of the internet, and it went viral because of the internet. And so thank you for acknowledging that. Actually, on the World's Greatest Motivator show, we do have Reverend Michael Beckwith, as you mentioned, as one of the stars, but also Bob Proctor, and also John Azaraf, and also Lisa Nichols, and also. So these same voices are still around, and they are still very effective, in my opinion, of helping to elevate what's really important today. And that is that, yes, the law of attraction is part of it, but it's they do, I think, even a better job, because we are in an evolutionary stage of the personal development messaging. And every one of them now talk about the law of vibration, is that to be in the vibration of a higher idea always trumps the vibration of a lower idea. And that's why I love this program so much, Mark. And what you've done here is because the idea of adding value as a way of life becomes a highly beautiful idea that's attractive. And however, Anne, I just want to say this: I am aware that young people now do know about the law of attraction. As a matter of fact, I just heard the other day, and this is really cute. There are, I think it was Bezos, or one of the main influencers, I think it was Bezos, who has his particular rules of attraction. And so a lot of the younger people are on their videos, on their iPhones and other smartphones, doing a lot of attraction work. And it's fascinating because that younger generation, I think, already has it in their DNA a little bit more than, an older generation. They get it faster. That law of attraction makes sense to them. The law of vibration makes sense to them. They assimilate things so fast now that they actually, can manifest much faster than I think I ever could or did. Does that? I think
No,
so. I have a great deal of hope. A great deal of hope for the future.
I agree. It's the abundance. So many people live in a world where there's a lack of abundance, and if I give, then I have to take away from something else, and that's what I think Mark is trying to focus on: the fact that you come into a situation not to see what's wrong, but to see what's right and what abundance we can build on. And when you look at things, for example, like TikTok, when we thought social media was done and had been exposed, and then comes along this newbie, not taking anything away from anybody else, just adding more abundance to an environment that we all can share and be part of. And it's that type of environment that I think you are trying to expand for people.
Oh, yeah, well said. And I think all of us are. Certainly it takes a lot of understanding and willing to change, right? Oh my goodness, the level of change, it just gets more and more rapid.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, I think what you bring to the table is exciting, and I like to hear it spoken of again, Lynn. And it brings me back to so many of those. Not that I ever truly left them, because I've always lived in world abundance. But I'm sometimes get batted around by those who find it that they don't have that much to give because they have to take from themselves in order to give.
And
Ah,
it's interesting you say that, because when you go in many companies, you've got the higher ups and the supposedly the one down the bottom. And what's interesting is that when in a turnaround situation or a crisis situation, it's often the people down below that make it happen, not the ones up above, because they're more in touch with what they need. They're more in touch with what's happening there, and they don't know it until somebody, in many ways, we raise the question, or like Lynn said, we come alongside them and don't treat them like they're above or below, but we're doing this together type of a situation. I didn't really get a chance to introduce Ann and James. That was something I normally do. Ann is quite the pioneer herself. You were talking about you being one of 50, and jumped forward. We graduated from college together. We both shared a very treasured friend, Kenny Johnson, and he was my roommate, and I knew Ann. And but Ann worked in big business. She was the head of Hallmark Retail, and she was the head of FTD, and worked on several other major companies as CEO or vice president or whatever. She's in many cases she was the only female in the boardroom, that's for sure. So you have a bit in common with each other. So
kudos to you, Ann.
Thank you, Lynn. One of my favorite stories is at one corporate meeting when I heard someone turn to someone else and say, "Did somebody bring their wife?" And I was president of retail. I was president of a division for Vanity Fair at that point, and they had never had a woman president up until that point. And it was you had to be a little more gymnastic, possibly, because you had to figure out how you were going to use some of the things that the men had used to your advantage, while bringing in the nuances that a gal can bring to the table that they've had sorely overlooked at that point.
Mm-hmm. Wow, well, I'm sure that you were not only breaking the glass ceiling, but being a great role model for those who followed your footsteps.
It's so interesting that you bring that up, Lynn, and I wonder if you've experienced this as a mentor in exactly what you're speaking. I found so often that women coming through were unwilling to take 3 steps back to get 10 steps forward, because they work so hard to get those 3 steps. It was impossible to move back to go forward. And sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you have to make, not make a complete 180 to get to where you want to go. Mm-hmm. And they just weren't willing to do it. And so that's when they often got happy with being called administrative assistant instead of a secretary.
Well, what did you mean by step back a little bit?
Well, sometimes when you want to make a bold career move, you have to come in at a spot that isn't possibly at the same level at the spot you're in right now, but you can read the tea leaves and see that the potential for that is so great that that's where you should be going. And so
that's the future self, right?
That's right. That's right. That's talking to your future self and not looking at where you're landing so much as where you want to be.
That's very powerful. And looking back on my career, I can see times when I would have liked to have had a mentor to outline for me what it could mean to me, the value that it could bring to me. But no, really, I didn't have that, nor was, you're just, like you said, coping, taking every day to just get through the day as a woman in a stressful situation where, you're really, you're breaking ground. When you're breaking ground, it's like takes all that you've got to move that, bulldozer ahead. Now, I think that we have a little bit more elegance in co-creating coordinated movement as a more elegant way of management. But I think that was sorely missing, very few mentors. And that's why I'm passionate about the power of mentorship, how we can be more conscious to be mentors, not only asking for mentorship, because that's also a skill set, know when you need to ask for mentorship, but also to offer it and to see when it's needed. But the skill of communication, again, it's a revolutionary conversation when you can mentor someone well.
Yes,
Thank
absolutely.
you. I'm going to interrupt for a quick second. I want to get back to James, and if Ann has other questions as well, I would like to tap into those. But I don't want to forget, because sometimes I forget to close the loop on some things, and Ann will remind me later. We always ask the interviewee after in the last parts of the interview, is there something that came up from you, from us, or from you, or from the environment today, the interaction today, that you had never thought of, or that surprised you and surprised you in some way? Or like my late partner in the Revolutionary Conversations program, Gloria Axelrod, used to say, "How do I know what I mean until I hear what I say?" And that has happened to me many, many times in presentations, being able to say, I'll be talking along, doing the presentation, and all of a sudden something will come out of me that I never planned on saying, and probably never even said to myself. And anyway, is there anything that comes to mind as you were going through this? Like, I'm glad I said that, or I never thought about that, or whatever.
Interesting question. I think the concept of future self, future value, is one that rang true for me. And I want to stick a pin in that for myself and come back and explore it more. How can I be my best self? It's a question that I believe we can all really ask ourselves. There's the whole personal development industry is based on that. How can we motivate others to be their best selves? Well, what does that mean? So what I really loved was the opportunity for me personally, since I do have this interesting financial background of 35 years of helping to craft portfolios and build wealth for people over time, to look back and look at the meaning of economic value added, present value, future value. Those are all economic terms that, we used to live and die by, and measurement sticks. But putting those measurement sticks to oneself and say, well, what is it that I'm here to be? What am I called to do? What is it that's within my spirit that is yet to be done and excites me? Those things I want to contemplate. Those things I want to have a revolutionary conversation with myself about. Those things I want to dream more within myself and see that the dream state is the seed, the seeding, the place of seeding for that future value.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
James, I don't want to forget you here.
Thanks for not forgetting me. It's just been super stimulated by this conversation. I mean, and I want to sort of comment off of the there was a comment from our participant from Pakistan.
Hassan?
Yes, expressing his appreciation for you bringing these things to the world stage, because I feel like, you know, you came in and so often we have these conversations and it's about what people at my level, you know, can do to start this whole wave of improvement versus people at the top and the level of integrity that has to occur, you know, at the top. And so much of this, we had Ronaldo our last guest, and he was talking about some of the stuff that happened in the late 70s, where I became actually sort of aware of the you know, the country I lived in, and how there was a little bit of a difference in certain kinds of economic situations, and by now, you know, often I feel like you have to have an attorney, you know, present to walk out your front door, and there's you know, there's so many rules to be a guy that wants to moonlight and have a small business on the side and a full-time job and try to invent something and write a book. You know, there's so many liabilities to being a guy that wants to do a lot of different things if you're going to pay your taxes correctly and publish things right and not, you know, not go bankrupt or use behave with in a certain out integrity manner to survive that whole arc. And so I feel like, you know, this whole idea of compassionate capitalism, you know, this whole sort of as within, so without kind of approach you have. And even the lexicon, you know, that you used is sort of spiritual in nature. You know, it's the idea of a higher power being brought into any kind of financial planning.
Right.
is revolutionary to me. So, you know, I don't know if that's just a comment or anything that you can speak to, because I have about 8 or 12 bullet points here, things I don't want to get into.
Well, James, that's pretty brilliant. I think it's wonderful. Thank you so much for pointing out some of the resistances that we do have and we face, and in our normal everyday life. There's no doubt that we are in a world of liability, and it's always good to have an attorney as your best friend, I think. Certainly in the investment advisory world, the number one thing that I was the most expert at and made sure I was the legalities of what it takes to operate correctly in the investment advisory world, which is all, you know, the laws that govern our financial institutions and the laws that govern our economic institutions and corporate institutions are real. Those are like, you know, guardrails that we have within which to navigate and operate. And there's no question that there's been abuse, especially in economic terms, countries, politically, and so forth. That's a deeper topic, James. But the main thing that I'm feeling from you is that, what does one do? I mean, it's just it takes a lot of awareness to bring your best and all your gifts to the world and still have that part of you that has to cross the T's and dot the I's and make sure that the paperwork is done correctly. And that is just the world that we live in. No different from any other time in history. No different from, I mentioned Walt Disney. I'd love to give you a story about that in just a second, but Walt Disney, back in the high creative days of the beginning of that corporation, And remember that corporation has been a wellspring of wealth for people around the world, not just Americans who happen to buy the Disney stock at any point over the last 40 years, but also for their employees, and just in terms of ideology, the hope that has been marketed and consumed, I think spiritually even, of the young children who listen to the movies that are created by Walt Disney, and the ideology of dream, and you can do anything, just dream it, just try it, just dream it. You have the power, it's within, it comes from within. Be with your dreams, allow your dreams to be real, allow your dreams to pull you forward. Yes, you do have certain conditions. Yes, we're all on a hero's journey. Yes, compassionate capitalism is being birthed right now after egregious problems all over the world, which still happen and still are going on. But there is a higher awareness that I choose to steep myself in and get educated about, so that we can all do better together. I hope that helps a little bit. I
It
really do
does.
believe that we're making progress.
Well, and I also think it really helps for people like yourself to point out to people like me that this is no different than any other time in history. There was, doing business during the Roman Empire was just as difficult.
Oh my gosh,
as doing business.
you know what?
Today.
You're so right. In the Roman Empire, all of the progress was done by slaves. Come
Yeah.
on, the whole place was built
Yes.
by their slaves. Even the Egyptians, the slaves. I mean, we have made some progress.
Yeah. Sometimes we want to think that it's all, it's today's problem, and it's just part of being human. And I really appreciate you bringing right sizing that.
My
And
pleasure.
as a man who who's not afraid to admit that he's cried at the end of Moana,
Yes.
and that he had a deep spiritual experience watching the end of that animated Disney show.
So I think this is a perfect opportunity for me to tell my story about Walt Disney, if it's okay with you, Mark.
And I just want to be careful of the time for Ann and James, because they may have.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll make it fast. Back when I was probably 1988 or so, I came across an article in Fortune magazine that was an illustration dating back to 1957, illustrated by Walt Disney himself. And it was called Walt Disney's Theory of Value Creation.
Oh, really?
Walt Disney's Theory of Value Creation. And on one illustration, one piece of paper, he did this. He outlined visually what his future value was going to look like. And in the middle, he had his content creators, who were the value creators. The value creation of everything came from the dreamers here. They were dreamers. They're the ones who did the movies and everything. And then down here was Disneyland, and over here was the record company, and over here was the TV shows, and over here was and they all kind of were working together from the central place from which the value was being created. And the article went on to say that the implicit future evolution, that this particular thing provided guidance concerning the competitive terrain that Disney eventually faced, but that the assets and the capability, the combination of his theory that we evolve forward through time, that theory has not fundamentally changed by Disney Corporation and is still operative today. And I just think for, that particular thing has excited me for about 3 decades now, since I saw that. And I wanted to share that because, Mark, what you're doing here is so important. One man built an empire and really created wealth around the world for people based upon a theory of value creation.
Wow,
And for
that's
that,
a
I'm so
a
grateful.
wonderful example. And the fact
So
that
thank
it's
you
stuck.
for this particular opportunity to be on your show.
Well, it goes both ways. It goes both ways. You know, one of the reasons why we focus on individuals like you is that oftentimes people look at successful people and they don't believe they can also be successful. They don't realize that in the 9 episodes that we've done, everybody's had a different way of, you know, finding their value, where it came from. We didn't even talk a lot about, you know, your mom being a, you know, a role model for you. And now here you are also with your mom doing a TV show or a podcast of your own about your mom, and, you know, and obviously there's a lot of reflective and creative and evolutionary things going on for you in that process with your mom. But everybody does it different. And I hope that, you know, when we keep going and going, that people look at interviews like yours and say, I can relate to that. And I can relate to, you know, how I can do it myself, how I can touchstone where I came from. And several people have had some pretty big ahas as to where that came. I never thought about that before. You know, so they can go back and touch on it. It's been very exciting, and it's kind of like there's no rules about how you create value. You just got to tap into what the universe or you know, what comes with you. What's the package? You've got an awful lot going on. So how do you tap into it? So thank you. Next month we have Marty Cooper. Marty invented the handheld cell phone, and he has a lot to talk about the history of phones from mobile phones, meaning that they used to have car phones back in 1939, to where he kicked off in the early 70s and the mid 80s. So, Lynn, thank you very much. You are always an inspiration, and if I'm grumpy and I don't have a smile on my face, all I have to do is do an interview with you.
Well, thank you. Well, I hope you invite me back. It's been a lot of fun. I appreciate you. And thank you, Anne and James, so much.